Hey guys, tonight we dive into the less flashy, often snooze-worthy stretch in the life of one of history's most famous rulers, Hammurabi. You know him, right? The guy with the towering stone tablet full of laws that sound like they came straight out of a don't do this or else handbook for ancient Babylonians. But what about the time between those laws? The long, slow nap of Hammurabi's reign when things weren't so dramatic? That's what we're unwrapping tonight. A stretch so uneventful you probably won't survive it without dozing off. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time down below. I love knowing who's staying up with me around the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the heat of ancient Babylon, where the Euphrates lazily curves past sun-baked walls and busy markets. But here's the twist. The king, Hammurabi, isn't charging into battle or crafting new laws for a bit. No, he's taking a long breather. The historical record, already pretty spotty, leans heavy on his legal innovations and military campaigns, but for this stretch, it's quiet. Like, really quiet. Hammurabi's famous code was set, his borders mostly secured, and the usual chaos of palace intrigues seems to pause like a forgotten playlist on shuffle. Imagine this, the mighty ruler, famed for justice carved in stone, reclining in the shadow of a date palm, feet resting on a carved stool, eyes half closed as the sun warms his face. It's not a scene you picture when you think Babylonian king, but that's exactly the vibe. This lull, the long nap, lasts long enough for a whole season of history to slip by, unnoticed, like a slow afternoon siesta. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi actually sought out these quiet stretches intentionally, or if they were simply the calm after stormy years of conquest and lawmaking. Maybe the king was just tired, the human behind the legend needing a break from his monumental duties. And here's a quirky tidbit to mull over. Did you know Babylonian rulers sometimes used crocodile dung as sunscreen? Yeah, the ancient equivalent of "don't forget the SPF" might have involved smelly, squishy stuff. Imagine Hammurabi sitting there with that on his skin, trying to enjoy a peaceful nap. Even though you might picture this as a dull pause, it's also a time where the echoes of his laws ripple quietly through city streets, and the everyday lives of Babylonians hum steadily along. So, settle in yourself, because sometimes the most fascinating stories hide in the quietest moments. You blink, and the scenery doesn't change much. Still warm, still dusty, still Babylon. But now you notice how alive the silence is. Not the silence of a tomb or a forgotten ruin, but the silence of a city breathing slowly, like it knows its king is resting and doesn't want to disturb him. Babylon in the lull between royal decrees becomes something else. Not a theater of war or justice, but a tapestry of subtle sounds and daily rituals. You wander through narrow alleyways as the afternoon sun climbs higher, bouncing off walls of sun-baked mud brick. The air smells faintly of clay and crushed herbs, and in the distance, the Euphrates gurgles like it's chuckling to itself. No one is shouting. The only laws being enforced right now are social ones. Barter with fairness, don't insult your neighbor's goat, and try not to knock over the beer jugs at the tavern. You pass through a shaded market street, where traders yawn behind their wares. Clay pots, palm leaves, jewelry made from colored glass and lapis lazuli. Someone's grinding barley into flour. Someone else is playing a sleepy reed tune. The rhythm of Babylon on a slow day feels almost choreographed, like the entire city is gliding on a gentle current. Back at the palace, yes, that massive walled compound, you get a sense of the downtime within the royal court. Hammurabi's guards lean on their spears, their eyes half-lidded but alert enough to snap back if anything twitches too fast. But nothing does. Even the palace cats, those aloof little guardians of food storage, seem content to loaf in corners, tails flicking in lazy sync. It's during this stretch that Babylon breathes a bit easier. You wouldn't know from modern textbooks, but downtime like this is crucial for a civilization. The farmers tend their canals without fearing sudden draft orders. The merchants ship grain upriver without worrying about price hikes from sudden royal demands. Peace is profitable, after all. Hammurabi might not be swinging a sword or chiseling new commandments into stone, but in his quiet way, he's holding the whole thing together. A mainstream fact, just to keep things anchored. Babylon during Hammurabi's reign was one of the earliest examples of a fully integrated urban economy using silver as currency, contracts on clay tablets, and standardized weights and measures. It's bureaucracy, but with style. Yet scholars still debate whether the piece was deliberate or accidental. Did Hammurabi truly aim to pause, to let his city marinate in stillness for a while? Or was it just the logistical lag after too many campaigns? Some even suggest that illness slowed him down, a detail no stone monument will admit. Now here's a fun curveball for your sleepy brain. Some Babylonian astrologers believe the king's rest cycles influence the city's energy flow. Yes, energy flow. Forget feng shui. This was more like feng shui-rabi. They would read the stars not just for war or harvest, but to decide if the king should be nudged back into action or left to snooze another week. Imagine your national policy hinging on whether Venus was in a chill mood. You drift further, now onto the rooftops of common homes. They're flat and sun-baked, perfect for catching a breeze. Some families are drying figs. Others are just lounging, eating lentils and telling stories. Kids play with clay figurines in the dust, unaware their games echo myths older than writing. And somewhere in the breeze, you almost hear the hum of satisfaction, the sound of a civilization briefly not in crisis. Hammurabi doesn't need to shout orders today. The code's already been carved, the gears already turning. For once, the mighty lion of Babylon is lying down, yawning deeply, letting the city drift on without interruption. And you're right there with him, breathing slow, letting go. You meander now through the courtyard of memory, where the code of Hammurabi looms. Not physically, though, yes, you can almost see that towering stele with its cuneiform script curling like vines around dark stone, but in the minds of the people. Even during the king's long nap, the laws whisper through every marketplace transaction, every marriage negotiation, every dispute over a borrowed ox. The laws are famous now, maybe even too famous. Everyone remembers the eye for an eye thing, though the actual text is a bit more nuanced than modern memory allows. In the real world of Hammurabi's Babylon, the code wasn't just about punishment. It was a kind of cosmic balance sheet. Wages, rents, inheritances, surgical fees, even the proper price of a beer. It wasn't law so much as life, standardized and stamped. But here's the interesting thing. While the laws remained etched in stone, the man behind them started to blur into the background. You trail into the royal archive. Imagine clay tablets stacked like lasagna sheets on shelves, scribes moving quietly, dust catching in beams of sun. Hammurabi's name is still spoken here, of course, but now it echoes more softly. He's no longer the bustling center of statecraft. He's become maintenance, governance on autopilot. Like someone designed a really intense to-do list, finished it, and now just waters the metaphorical plant once a week. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi actually wrote the laws himself. Was he the ancient world's first legal genius, or just the king who commissioned a brilliant team of scribes to consolidate centuries of oral tradition and regional codes? Some scholars say the code was less an innovation than a PR stunt, a stone monument of control to remind Babylon's conquered neighbors who held the stylus now. Still, you have to admire it. The stele doesn't hide its agenda. At the top, the king's shown standing before Shamash, the sun god and deity of justice. Shamash literally hands him the laws, divine authority in legal form. Talk about the ultimate, I've got a signed permission slip from God flex. But even gods nap. And Hammurabi, as it turns out, isn't sprinting into new edicts or public speeches. He's somewhere in the palace, maybe pacing the tiled floor of a sunroom, sipping a warm mixture of date syrup and goat milk. Maybe thinking. Maybe not. That's the luxury of ruling a city that currently runs itself. Meanwhile, the laws stretch out across Babylon like a network of invisible strings. Farmers know what their yields are worth. Merchants know their weights. Builders know not to skimp on clay, or they'll be squashed under their own collapsing walls. Even the midwives know what they're owed per birth, and what happens if they mess up. Hint, it's not a slap on the wrist. Let's just say Hammurabi had strong opinions about medical malpractice. But in the long nap, these laws take on a sleepy rhythm of their own. People obey more from habit than fear. Like traffic lights at 3 a.m., you still stop, even when the roads are empty. Here's a quirky aside. The code included regulations about beer. Yes, beer. One rule fined tavern keepers who shortchanged customers or ran secret meetings. Ancient Babylonian dive bars were apparently more politically spicy than we give them credit for. Imagine a world where your bartender might also be a spy. Cheers. And as you lie there, half dreaming of barley brews and dusty laws, you feel the pulse of a society so tightly woven that its king can fall asleep at the loom, and the pattern still holds. The stele stands silent. The scribes still scribble. The people still barter, bake, argue, fall in love, get fined for building crooked walls. Hammurabi is not gone, just quieter now, like a lighthouse after the storm. You stretch your legs. No need to rush. There's no new law to chase. Just the echo of a code, humming softly in the background, like the gentle turn of a wheel that doesn't need pushing anymore. You drift deeper into the slower lanes of Hammurabi's Babylon, leaving behind the stele and its sharp-edged laws to explore something much softer. The man himself, removed from ceremony and stone. Hammurabi, the fierce legislator and conqueror, is, for now, a father, a husband, a daydreamer beneath the palms. The sun filters through wide fronds in the royal courtyard, laying gentle patterns on the pale stone. You follow the shadows to a low bench where the king might have sat, sandals off, one hand resting on a jug of water beaded with condensation. You imagine him watching the slow swish of royal fish in the pond, those long, twitchy things that the palace gardeners claimed were sacred, though no one could remember which god had blessed them. This is a side of Hammurabi rarely mentioned in the clay records, the one who sometimes skipped meetings with his governors to walk the inner garden with his youngest son, or who listened genuinely to court musicians even when their stringed instruments went wildly out of tune. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi had the time or temperament for leisure. Was he too serious to indulge in the fluff of palace life? Or did he, like many rulers before and after, learn the art of appearing stern while secretly savoring the small stuff? There's no proof, of course, that he kept exotic pets, but let's indulge the possibility. Babylon was a magnet for rare things. What if, tucked behind a colonnade, the king fed a tame civet bits of dried figs? What if his favorite companion wasn't a general, but an unusually large turtle that had its own name and sunning stone? You tread softly past a pavilion where scribes lounge, not working, just playing dice games and making harmless bets with honey pastries. Hammurabi may have once issued orders in this very spot, barking demands for grain ledgers and militia tallies. But now, you picture him listening to jokes told by eunuchs with too much time on their hands, maybe even laughing once or twice, a deep, quiet laugh, like thunder muttering far away. And here's your quirky detail of the night. Ancient Babylonian nobles, including perhaps Hammurabi himself, used snail slime and powdered minerals as a kind of facial mask. Beauty sleep wasn't just metaphor, it was maintenance. The long nap, it turns out, might have had a skincare routine. Out beyond the palace, the city goes on, mostly unaware of what the king does with his time. That's the secret of effective rule. Do enough early on that people keep moving without needing constant direction. It's like winding a clock so well it ticks for years without a reset. You pass a wide veranda where the royal children once learned to write cuneiform by pressing reed styluses into soft clay. The tablets they made, crooked, uneven, full of misspellings, probably got tossed, but maybe one survived. Maybe Hammurabi, proud father, picked one up, squinted at the wobbly lines, and kept it. Maybe it's still buried somewhere, unread, but once deeply cherished. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't always thinking of justice and conquest. Maybe some days he let his mind wander to the taste of warm date bread, or the way his wife wore lapis around her neck, or how the light hit the river just so at sunset. Historians don't like maybe. They want evidence, not feeling. But history isn't made only in monuments. Sometimes it's shaped in the soft spaces in between, the days when nothing happened, the long, slow afternoons when the king yawned and decided not to hold court. You find yourself relaxing with him now, shoulders heavy, breath slow. No grand speeches, no laws, just the hush of birds in trees planted long before you were born, and the whisper of a king who once changed everything, now simply watching the wind. The palace fades behind you, not gone, just softer now, like a melody slipping into the background. You head toward the banks of the Euphrates, where the pulse of Babylon murmurs beneath the surface. The water is slow today, sluggish and full of secrets, reflecting clouds that barely move. It smells of silt and sun-warmed algae, a little metallic, a little ancient. You crouch by the edge and run your fingers through the shallows, wondering how many of Hammurabi's thoughts were carried away by this same river. All kings have their quiet confidants, and maybe this one preferred a river that didn't answer back. Hammurabi's long nap isn't just a pause, it's a release. For years he had shouldered the burdens of unification, justice, infrastructure, alliances, wars. His decisions shaped cities, altered trade routes, made orphans and nobles of strangers. That sort of weight doesn't lift easily, but here, by the river, you feel it. A loosening, not retirement, not abdication, just permission to breathe. Mainstream fact time. The Euphrates River was the lifeline of Babylon, feeding its agriculture through one of the most intricate canal systems of the ancient world. These channels weren't just holes in the dirt. They were engineered marvels, often involving sluices, gates, and seasonal redirection. And yes, Hammurabi supervised improvements to them. Laws in stone are great, but water in the desert? That's the real flex. But historians still argue whether he truly engineered these systems himself or merely took credit. Royal inscriptions, after all, were less humble brag and more full-on PR campaign. It's entirely possible a league of anonymous canal workers deserve the credit for keeping Babylon from becoming one large, sun-scorched raisin. You step into a small ferry, flat-bottomed, patched with tar and optimism, and let the current pull you away from the noise. The city blurs into green reeds and golden dust. You pass a family gathering water in woven jars. A group of boys fish with hooks made from bone and twisted string. You even spot a bearded priest carefully dipping a tablet into the river, as if washing its contents clean, a ritual for forgotten wrongs. And here's your quirky detail. Babylonian riverboats often used inflated goat bladders as flotation devices. Yes, you read that right. Somewhere, someone inflated a goat's stomach and said, "Yes, this shall carry me across a river." Practical? Sure. Sanitary? Questionable. But hey, you have to admire the commitment. The boatman, if you can call him that, doesn't speak. He just watches the water, steering with a paddle carved from datewood. You sense he's seen Hammurabi before. Not the king in robes and decree, but the quiet man who sometimes came alone to the river, just to sit. Maybe he sat right where you are now. Maybe he let his bare feet dangle over the edge. Maybe he said nothing at all. You pass under a narrow footbridge of rope and timber, worn smooth by sandals and time. Someone's goat trots across, head high, unbothered by the sway. You smile. Hammurabi had laws about goats. If one broke a wall, if one was stolen, if one gave too little milk, you better believe there was a rule for it. The code was meticulous. Justice, it seems, came down even to bleeding livestock. But what did the king feel about goats, or rivers, or his own reflection in the water when he stared at it too long? We don't know. That's the space we float in now. The ferry drifts past a cluster of river lilies, petals open like small cups catching dreams. The air hums with insects, soft and rhythmic. You lean back. The sky is wide and lazily blue. Nothing chiseled in stone today. No proclamations. Just this long, slow ride through Hammurabi's quiet. You wonder if the king dreamed of this. An empire so well-oiled it could run while he watched the current go by. Maybe the long nap isn't an accident. Maybe it's a reward. And maybe you're not just drifting through Babylon. Maybe you're drifting through a forgotten version of him, the man beneath the myth. The king who, for one long, beautiful stretch, let go of the reins and trusted the laws to do their job. The boat turns slightly. The palace is a blur now, just a warm smudge in the distance. Ahead, more reeds, More river, more peace. And for once, nobody's watching. Nobody needs anything. Nobody's quoting the code or writing new demands on fresh clay. You rest your head on the side of the boat, the wood warm from sun and time, and let the river carry you onward. The ferry slows as it brushes the edge of a small island, a soft hump of land no bigger than a marketplace square. You hop off, barefoot now, into the reeds, where the soil squishes pleasantly beneath your toes. No one lives here, not really, but traces of life cling to everything. A broken pot, a half-buried sandal, the ghost of a fire pit, now filled with ash and wildflowers. You could imagine Hammurabi wandering here, escaping court life when the gold ceilings and stone protocol felt too heavy. He wouldn't need an entourage, just a few figs tucked into his robe, maybe a wineskin filled with something mildly fermented, and the freedom to not answer questions. This island is where your nap deepens. It's where the great king, this once whirlwind of lawmaking and boundary drawing, becomes for a moment small, human. You see him reclined beneath a bent tamarisk tree, head resting on folded arms, sandals kicked off and forgotten. His crown, that heavy symbol of rule, lies beside him in the grass, gathering dust and insect interest. He looks tired, but not in a bad way, in the way that comes after a long project, when you finally finish, and for the first time in years, there's no immediate next. Historians still argue whether this version of Hammurabi ever existed. Did he truly slow down in his later reign? Or did he work until his last breath, issuing edicts from his bed, stylus shaking in hand? Some records suggest a soft decline, others hint at persistent ambition. But written history often fears silence. It wants action, not stillness. Yet here we are, on an island made of stillness. You trace the outlines of a low circle of stones, a meditation ring maybe, or a quiet meeting place for his most trusted advisors, the ones who spoke in low tones and didn't bow too deeply, or maybe just a place to roast fish on a stick while watching the stars. Side note, Babylonian astronomers were among the best in the ancient world. Even during the nap, someone out there was probably tracking Jupiter with unnerving precision. You lie back on the mossy patch near the king, not too close, but close enough. You hear his breathing, slow, even, in, out, a rhythm so peaceful it synchronizes your own. Here's your quirky tidbit. Ancient Mesopotamians believed dreams had divine meaning, and they kept professional dream interpreters. Whole tablets were devoted to decoding what it meant if, say, a bird stole your shoe in a dream, or if you dreamed of standing on a flood. So you wonder, what dreams did Hammurabi have here, beneath the tree? Did he dream of laws still unwritten? Of his children ruling wisely? Of Babylon rising or falling, long after he was dust? You close your eyes, just for a moment, and drift deeper. Somewhere in the distance, the river sighs. The reeds sway like old curtains. A cricket dares to chirp, then changes its mind. And the king, still breathing gently beside you, says nothing. But in his silence is an answer. This long nap isn't defeat. It isn't boredom. It's trust. In the code, in the people, in the world, to keep spinning even when he stops pushing it. He once roared commands across battlefields. Now, he listens to frogs. You think that might be the wisest decision of all. The tamarisk leaves shift above you, dappling your face with warm shade. You let yourself imagine what it would be like to never wake again, not in a grim way, just in a finished way. Hammurabi doesn't need more fame. His laws already echo through millennia. He doesn't need more clay tablets. He needs rest. And for now, so do you. You lie still a little longer, letting the reeds hum lullabies older than writing. But even naps drift eventually, and so does this one. Not because it's over, no, not yet, but because something stirs. Not loud, not urgent, just the faint whisper of memory. The island begins to fade, gently pulled away like sheets after a good, deep sleep, and you find yourself moving again, back through time, though not entirely forward. You're in a workshop now. It's dim and cool, with filtered light slipping through slats overhead, and the rich smell of clay hangs heavy in the air. Around you, scribes crouch over damp tablets, styluses tapping like polite rain. These are the craftsmen of memory, the ones who took Hammurabi's words and pressed them, one wedge at a time, into eternity. One fact many forget: Babylon was more bureaucratic than brutal. Hammurabi's genius wasn't only in waging wars or making alliances, it was in making paperwork sacred. He didn't just declare justice, he documented it. And documentation meant scribes, rooms full of them. You kneel beside a young scribe, he can't be older than 17, and watch him as he carefully carves line after line. He's working on a local copy of the code, one meant not for kings, but for the town governor who has trouble remembering what fine to assign when someone borrows a donkey and doesn't return it. The scribe's fingers are stained with ink and red from rubbing clay. He frowns, sticks out his tongue slightly, and leans in. You can't help but smile. This is the backbone of Hammurabi's empire. Kids with good posture and patient hands. And here's your quirky detail. Scribes often practiced on clay doodles before committing to real tablets. Some of these rough drafts include little stick figures, jokes, and once, a picture of a man being chased by what looks suspiciously like a chicken with a crown. No one knows why. Historians still argue whether all parts of the code were enforced equally. Did commoners really get the same treatment as nobles? Did women have the same rights in every town, or just in the capital? Some scholars suggest that regional governors interpreted the code like a buffet, taking what they liked, ignoring what they didn't. Others believe Hammurabi demanded strict adherence, with roaming inspectors and surprise audits. What we do know is that copies of the code have turned up all over Mesopotamia, some carved in stone, others inked onto clay, even fragments on bricks. It was more than law. It was branding. A way to make sure everyone knew who was boss, even if he wasn't in the room. The workshop is calm, filled with that cozy kind of focus that comes from people who know they're doing something important, even if the world outside is chaos. You lean against the wall and listen to the soft chorus of tapping styluses and gentle muttering. Somewhere behind a curtain, a master scribe reads the code aloud in a droning nasal voice. He doesn't stop for jokes or questions, just keeps going. If a man's ox gores another's ox, if a builder builds a house and it falls, if a son strikes his father. It's not the most bedtime-friendly material, but there's something oddly comforting in its predictability. Cause, effect, crime, punishment, order, always. And isn't that the secret of the long nap? It's easier to rest when you know the world has rules, when you've written them yourself. You shift your gaze to a shelf where completed tablets are drying. Some are wrapped in linen, some labeled with string and clay seals. You trace a finger over one, still faintly warm. Inside that little square is someone's fate, an argument settled, a punishment agreed upon, maybe even a pardon. These were more than just law. They were anchors. In a time of floods, war, famine, and the occasional dramatic goat stampede, people needed something to hold on to. Hammurabi gave them that. Not always fairly, not always kindly, but he gave them structure. Outside the workshop, the sun lowers in the sky, casting gold over the riverbanks. The scribes begin to clean their tools, stacking unused clay like loaves of bread. The young boy sighs, cracks his knuckles, and mutters about how his back hurts more than a man twice his age. You grin. Same, honestly. One final fact. In Mesopotamian culture, scribes held more status than you'd expect. They weren't just nerds with styluses. They were gatekeepers of knowledge, advisors, even spies at times. If Hammurabi trusted anyone outside his family, it was probably someone with ink under their nails. You give the room a last look. Not a single soldier, not a crown in sight. But this dusty, clay-covered place is the true engine of the king's reign, the quiet hum beneath the thunder. And somewhere, as the nap deepens again, you hear the faintest whisper of the king's voice, not barking orders, but maybe thanking someone. Maybe that tired, bent scribe who just happened to copy the tablet that would outlive them all. You step outside as the last rays kiss the rooftops, and the silence rolls back in. You follow the breeze as it lifts curls of dust down a quiet alley, one of the many passageways in Babylon that connect everything and nothing. This time, the city feels heavier, not in a sad way, more like dusk settling on a market square. The kind of quiet that comes after the crowd disperses, when you can still hear laughter echoing faintly off the walls, but no one's there. You find yourself inside what looks like a modest home. Mud brick walls, wooden beams, a small clay oven still warm. A woman stands at the doorway, humming softly while grinding barley. She doesn't see you, or maybe she chooses not to. You're just a breeze now, a drifting thought in Hammurabi's long sleep. You watch her work, her motions practiced and easy. Then, from the corner, a tiny voice squeaks, "What happens if someone steals your grain?" The woman chuckles and wipes her hands on her tunic. "Well," she says, "if they're caught, and they can't repay it, they get sold. That's what the code says." She says the code, the same way someone might say the sky or the sun. It's just there, immutable. You realize something. To people like her, Hammurabi wasn't just a ruler. He was the weaver of the rules, the one who gave names to consequences. She probably never saw the king, but she knew his words, passed down and warped like lullabies. Here's a historical fact to ground you. The Code of Hammurabi was one of the first legal documents to create a kind of minimum wage. If a worker was hired for a certain task, the pay wasn't just suggested, it was enforced. Not bad for a civilization without email or HR complaints. You drift through the house, which is more spacious than you'd expect. Clay jugs line the walls. There's a date palm broom by the doorway, and a pile of woven mats stacked neatly in one corner. This is not a poor household, but not a rich one either. Somewhere in the middle, like most. As you pass the threshold into the back courtyard, another layer unfolds. A teenage boy is carefully fixing a broken tool under the flickering light of a small oil lamp. He's focused, lips pursed, tongue poking out the side of his mouth, clearly a family trait. He looks up for a moment and says, "If I break this again, Father says I have to work in the granary." A younger girl snickers from the doorway. "Father is the granary." Everyone laughs. The joke doesn't really make sense, but it works anyway. Then the girl whispers, "What happens if I marry someone and they don't treat me right?" The boy replies, "Then you can go to the elders, and if they agree, you can leave." This is your fringe tidbit. Some parts of Hammurabi's code allowed women to leave bad marriages. Not easily, and not often, but there it was, in wedge-shaped syllables. A legal whisper of autonomy in a world that mostly demanded silence. Historians still argue whether those protections were truly honored or merely symbolic. Some believe that in wealthier urban centers like Babylon, women exercised more freedom than previously thought, owning property, running taverns, even initiating divorce. Others insist these were exceptions, rare as a cool breeze in July. But here, in this imagined moment of quiet domesticity, the law lives not in courts or stone, but in small talk. Hammurabi isn't a statue. He's a bedtime rule, a parental warning, the code says, kind of guy. You lean against a column and listen as the father arrives home, tired but smiling. He lifts the youngest child onto his shoulder and asks what nonsense they've all been up to. The kids shout over each other. The woman rolls her eyes. Dinner is served. It smells like lentils, herbs, and roasted onion. And while no one says it outright, it's clear. Hammurabi is here too, in the way this family handles fairness, in the way they joke about rules without fearing them, in the way they quote his laws like family proverbs. You glance at the family altar tucked in the corner, small clay statues of household gods. Next to them, a fragment of a tablet, one line visible. If a man brings an accusation and cannot prove it, you smile. Even here, where gods live in the corners and laughter stains the walls, the law is watching. Not harsh, not cold, just watching. And honestly, that's kind of comforting. The sky darkens to deep blue as the stars emerge, sharp and deliberate in the desert night. You know the family will sleep soon, stacked side by side on those mats. They'll dream of irrigation canals and donkey races and whatever else fills Babylonian minds. And somewhere in the distance, Hammurabi keeps napping, trusting that this house, this family, knows what to do. You step outside again, brushing past a fig tree heavy with fruit. A jackal yips in the distance. Maybe you imagine it, or maybe it's real, but you hear the quiet murmur of the code, dozens of rules whispered all at once, like wind threading through reeds. And you understand something strange and beautiful. Sometimes the most lasting empires aren't made of stone or war. They're made of bedtime answers, of quiet corrections, of mothers saying, "Because that's the rule," and children, for once, believing her. The world is sleeping well tonight. The stars are more scattered now, like someone shook the heavens just a little. You drift farther from that warm Babylonian home, letting the desert night carry you beyond the soft hum of city life and into its veins, the canals. You trail the water's path like a dragonfly skimming its surface. Narrow irrigation ditches thread through fields of barley and flax, twinkling under the moonlight. Here, Hammurabi's nap grows deep again, tucked under layers of practical brilliance that rarely get the spotlight. Laws may be remembered, but water keeps people alive. And Hammurabi, sleepy as he might have been, knew that. You float down a channel lined with palm roots and tiny frogs until the farms stretch wide on either side, quiet and symmetrical. Farmers snore on woven mats near their plots. Oxen twitch in their sleep. The scent of damp earth and cut reeds wraps around you like a blanket. Now here's your historical fact. One of the most important features of Hammurabi's rule was his obsession with water management. The code includes several laws about irrigation, rules for maintaining canals, what happens if you fail to clear your ditch, and yes, even fines if your laziness floods your neighbor's field. Classic, ancient, passive aggressiveness. You pause by a wooden footbridge. It creaks faintly under your not-quite weight. Beneath you, a canal runs smooth and dark, glinting with the shimmer of starlight. Somewhere downstream, someone left a jar to chill in the current. You wonder if it's beer or just water. In Babylon, both were sacred. Farmers here were early risers. But before they woke, they slept like bricks. Their days were long, filled with cutting reeds, channeling water, and offering bits of grain to whichever local god guarded their plot. But they also talked and laughed and, you guessed it, argued. And when they did, they needed a ruler who could settle things. That brings you to your quirky tidbit. In one preserved letter from a Babylonian archive, a farmer complains, not about rain or drought, but about his neighbor stealing his floodgate. Just picked it up and moved it. That's how personal water was. It wasn't just a resource, it was power. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi's irrigation policies were enforced across his entire kingdom or just in core regions. Some claim rural areas managed themselves, while others suggest that traveling inspectors, possibly dusty, scroll-wielding middle managers, ensured compliance. Either way, what's clear is that Hammurabi considered water sacred enough to legislate and smart enough to manage. You drift across a field of sesame plants, their soft leaves brushing the night. A farmer rolls over in his sleep and mumbles something about goats. You smile. Goats were always trouble. The dream deepens. You see now how the code wasn't just lofty philosophy. It was a tool, mud-caked and sun-bleached, used by real people solving real problems. If someone diverts water and it destroys a neighbor's crop, they pay. It wasn't fair by modern standards, but it worked. And in a place where summer could boil the ground and flash floods could erase a season's labor, working was everything. The irrigation network itself is something to marvel at. Hand-dug canals stretching miles, connected by sluice gates and simple locks. Hammurabi inherited much of it, sure, but he expanded and formalized it. That's the part people forget. He didn't just write rules, he enforced rhythms. You arrive now at a larger canal, wide enough for a small barge. A tethered boat floats silently, its hull rocking in time with the water. A child snores under a tarp, probably a fisherman's son, dreaming of river spirits and the one fish that always gets away. You pass under an arch of reeds, and something clicks gently in your memory. This was where the big festival happened, the annual New Year celebration, when the king would walk the processional way and reaffirm justice. Rituals, music, offerings, and behind it all, clean water in the fields. Without that, there would have been no grain, no bread, no city, no code. And here's a lovely image. Somewhere in the mud, pressed into a forgotten wall, a child once etched a fish, a palm tree, and, of course, a little stick figure king with a triangle crown. It was never meant for history, but it survived. It always does. The wind shifts. A faint scent of baked clay and wet thatch drifts your way. You pause and let it wash over you. Somewhere nearby, a baby fusses. A mother shushes. Life hums on. You start to feel the nap deepen again, not because of fatigue, but because of the rhythm. Everything here has rhythm. Water to fields, day to night, king to law. Even silence has a heartbeat, so you let the fields blur into one soft breath. The canals stretch like veins, pulsing slowly. Babylon dreams, and so does its king. He's not ruling, not planning, not editing his laws, just resting, trusting that the rules hold, that the channels stay clear, that the oxen don't step on anything important. And maybe that's the secret he figured out. Maybe ruling wasn't about being everywhere at once. Maybe it was about putting enough in place so that you could, eventually, disappear for a while. The stars are quiet now. The water flows slow. You don't need to speak. The world is speaking for you. You leave the canals behind, gliding gently upward into the stirring edge of early dawn. The first light kisses the roof lines of Babylon, flat and dusty and sun-baked. But you, in your floating, drowsy haze, aim for something taller, something unmistakably proud. Hammurabi's ziggurat. It rises like a wedding cake of gods, stacked layer upon layer, commanding the city's skyline. No spire, no gold, just ancient brick and sheer ambition. You circle it like a moth drawn to the memory of flame, though even you know this place isn't fiery. It's heavy with silence and history, and it smells like stone warmed by centuries. At the base, priests in linen robes murmur morning prayers. They don't see you, or they do, and they simply assume you're one more lost spirit wandering through Hammurabi's eternal doze. Either way, you're not here for them. You follow the steps. Slowly, carefully, you begin to ascend. And yes, you're still napping with Hammurabi, still swimming in that deep, curled-up brain space where laws are dreamt and remembered and forgotten. But something here has gravity, like walking through someone else's childhood photos, where everything is real but slightly out of focus. Here's your historical fact. Babylon's ziggurat was likely a prototype of what would later become known as the Tower of Babel. It was not a palace nor a courthouse. It was sacred. At its top, a temple, a room for a god, or maybe just for watching stars. Each tier you pass feels like a chapter of history untold. Hammurabi might have stood here once, dusty, sunburned, smiling politely at priests while mentally revising Article 138 for the 15th time. If a man divorces a wife who has borne him no children, you know the one. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some Mesopotamian priests believed that ziggurats were literal cosmic ladders, like actual stairways for gods to descend, one step for each level of the sky. It wasn't symbolic. They meant it. And who are we to argue with people who could do math with clay? You reach the top. It's quiet. A low table stands in the center, smeared with oils and sprinkled with dried petals. Not elaborate, not flashy, just enough to say, "We care. Please keep the sun rising." There's a cushion nearby, flattened from centuries of silent prayer. You imagine Hammurabi sitting here once, not as king, but as a man, not asking for more land or gold or armies, but for wisdom, or rest, or a way to settle 14 more barley disputes before dinner. The sky grows brighter, and you can see the city now, its puzzle of walls and alleys and rooftops stretching out like a woven mat. A few dogs bark sleepily. Someone's stirring a pot already. The world doesn't wait for kings to wake. From up here, the code feels far away. Not gone. Just smaller. You wonder what Hammurabi thought when he looked down from this height. Did he feel like a god? Or just like a really tired man trying to keep everything from falling apart? Historians still argue whether Hammurabi personally designed his laws or simply approved the final edits. Some claim he was an engaged thinker, deeply involved in shaping the code himself. Others suggest his scribes did the heavy lifting, and he just stamped it with kingly flair. Honestly, both are probably true. He likely started with a spark. What if builders had to fix their own bad work and let the bureaucratic machine do the rest? You lie back on the ziggurat's warm stone. The sun creeps higher, and the temple glows peach and amber. Everything hums. The code, the city, even your own breath. But now you notice something odd. In this long nap, through all these dusty memories and floating scenes, Hammurabi has never once appeared. Not his face, not his voice, just his shadow, cast in clay, echoed in laughter, pressed into laws. Maybe that's the point. Maybe he's still sleeping because he doesn't need to wake. Because his city, his people, and his giant brick rule book are doing just fine without him. Or maybe he never really slept. Maybe this nap, this quiet journey you're floating through, is just how we remember great rulers. In pieces, in kitchens, in barley fields, in floodgates and stolen oxen and temple prayers. Not as a man, as a presence. You roll onto your side the way you might on your own pillow. The wind up here is soft, and the view stretches to the horizon. Babylon exhales beneath you, alive and ordinary and ancient. And still, you hear the code, not shouted, not chiseled, just breathed. If a man steals an ox, he must repay 5-fold. If a builder constructs a house and it collapses, if a woman becomes sick and her dowry is questioned, you let it wash over you like rain on sun-baked stone. Not justice, not punishment, just patterns, habits, rituals carved in clay. Because at the end of the day, or the beginning of it, here at the top of the world, laws aren't about fear. They're about trust. Trust that things will be handled, that someone, somewhere, thought things through, even if that someone's been asleep for 4,000 years. You close your eyes, not from exhaustion, just to match the pace of the moment, and the breeze curls around you like a question no longer needing an answer. The ziggurat fades behind you like a cooling ember, and you drift again, not forward, not back, but inward, into quieter chambers of the kingdom's memory, past the fields and gods and laws, past the waking life of Babylon, into a gentler, slower corner. the family home. Not a palace, not a scribe's office, just an ordinary house. 4 walls of sun-dried brick, a flat roof, and a courtyard where someone once spilled lentil stew. It's all still here, if you look softly enough. You step into the courtyard. A fig tree leans slightly, its leaves fluttering in the hush of morning. The clay stove is still warm from last night's bread. And in the corner, yes, someone snores softly beneath a woven blanket. You sit on the edge of the low wall. Everything smells of soot, oil, and something you can only call home. And it's here, in this quiet scene, that you find another side of Hammurabi's long nap, the family man's kingdom. Here's your historical fact. Many of Hammurabi's laws revolved around the family. Marriage contracts, inheritance rights, rules for adoption, and yes, some incredibly specific guidelines for what to do when Uncle Idin Nabu fails to return your donkey again. The law was not just for kings and builders. It lived inside the household. Children rise slowly from mats in the corner room. One of them yawns and knocks over a jug. Clay shatters. No one scolds him. This is life, and it is forgiving. And your quirky tidbit. In Mesopotamia, some adoption contracts included fine print that the adopted child must care for their new parents in old age, or else they'd be legally unadopted. Imagine waking up one day and realizing your mom has filed emotional cancellation paperwork. Historians still argue whether these family laws were meant to protect women and children or to reinforce the authority of patriarchs. Some see them as progressive for their time, outlining protections and rights for wives and daughters. Others argue they mostly served the stability of male lineage. Like most things ancient and bureaucratic, it's both. A girl appears in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She blinks at you, then wanders past to check the fig tree for ants. She's wearing a tiny tunic, stitched with care, the hem uneven. The work of a mother who's sewing late by oil lamp while trying to hush a crying baby. You walk through the house without sound. A jar of dates sits on a shelf. A wax tablet lies open on a bench, half smeared with writing. Practice lines, maybe. The ox is strong, the man is just, the sun is high. Over and over. The start of literacy. You can feel it, can't you? This wasn't a kingdom of palaces and gold. It was a kingdom of repetition, of morning chores and bedtime prayers and stories told with the same 3 jokes every night. Hammurabi's laws reached here too, into kitchens and arguments and quiet disappointments. A clause about dowries here, an article about debts there, even custody arrangements for divorce. His dream was wide, yes, but it was also personal. A man shuffles in from the back room, grumbling about goats. That same goat from earlier, you're pretty sure. He pulls a pot from the stove and tastes the stew, shrugs, adds salt. He kisses his daughter on the head, and she makes a face like all kids do when grown-ups are too affectionate before breakfast. You stand under the archway between the courtyard and the main room. A shadow passes over the home, just a cloud, not an omen. But it's enough to remind you that these moments were fragile. Floods, famine, war. All of it could scatter a family like spilled lentils. Maybe that's why Hammurabi wrote so many laws about kinship, because the home was the only fortress most people had. And if he could keep that intact, if the arguments over cattle and cousins and inheritance didn't explode, Then maybe the kingdom would sleep as soundly as he hoped to. The morning presses on. The streets outside begin to murmur. Someone yells about bread prices. A chicken gets loose. You smile. Babylon's charm was never its perfection. It was its glorious, dusty chaos wrapped in ritual and routine. And still, the house hums. The father scoops food into bowls. The children sit cross-legged. There's no ceremony, just togetherness. Hammurabi's dream lived here too, not in declarations, but in these easy, mundane victories of family life. A meal shared, a joke repeated, a fig tree that refuses to die. You leave them now, not because the dream ends, but because your presence is no longer needed. They've got this, these people, this home. You're just the breeze that watched them eat. As you step into the street, you glance back once. The girl is laughing now, and her father pretends to be shocked by the flavor of the stew. He raises his eyebrows. The kids giggle. A law can't right this moment, but it can make sure no one ruins it. You drift again, up and over the homes and roof lines, past sleepy vendors and shouting children, past rooftops crowded with laundry line. You drift again, up and over the homes and roof lines, past sleepy vendors and shouting children, past rooftops crowded with laundry lines and drowsy cats. The world isn't fully awake yet, but it will be. And somewhere, Hammurabi still naps, his legacy curled in every spoonful of stew, every bedtime story, every child practicing letters by torchlight. You float away from the rooftops of waking Babylon, carried on a whisper of warmth and dust. The hum of the city grows fainter, replaced by the rhythmic plod of hooves and the creak of wagon wheels on dirt roads. You follow the sound, drifting eastward along a trade route as old as the king's laws themselves. It winds through low hills and rocky stretches, peppered with palms and mud-brick way stations. Traders trudge in both directions, robes flapping like sails on a sluggish river. You hover among them, invisible but not unwelcome, as if even now, centuries later, your presence is expected on this long road of commerce and conversation. This, too, is Hammurabi's Babylon, the part that moved. The lifeblood of a kingdom wasn't its temples or statues. It was the flow of goods, of gossip, of grain sacks and wool bundles and endless bartering over how much copper a sheep was worth. And that, my friend, is surprisingly hard to agree on. Here's your historical fact. Babylon sat at a strategic crossroads in Mesopotamia, linking trade between Sumer in the south and Akkad in the north. Under Hammurabi's reign, the city expanded into a central hub for merchants carrying everything from lapis lazuli to timber. Trade routes like this one kept the economy and the empire breathing. The merchants you follow now are a mixed bunch. Some hum to themselves. Others argue over whose ox should go first on a narrow pass. One man, short, balding, and extremely enthusiastic about onions, won't stop talking about how the last crop had twice the bite, just twice. He's been shouting about it for miles. No one responds anymore. He doesn't care. You weave between the wagons and camels, gliding alongside bolts of dyed linen and amphorae filled with dates. Somewhere in the back of a cart, a child naps atop a pile of wool, his mouth open in a perfect O. You smile. There's something poetic about sleeping through a trade route. A vendor offers a passing guard a pinch of dried apricots in exchange for a good word at the next city gate. The guard accepts with a wink and tucks the fruit into his belt. A gentle kind of corruption. Hammurabi probably wouldn't approve. And yet, his laws are here too. You spot it on a tablet tucked into a merchant's satchel, wrapped in leather, marked with wedge-shaped symbols. A copy of a contract. Not for land, not for marriage, but for a delivery of sesame oil, due in 2 weeks, or the borrower pays double. A standard clause, backed by the king's authority. Fringe tidbit time. In Babylon, the most trusted form of collateral wasn't land or even animals. It was family. Merchants often used relatives as loan guarantees. If I don't pay, my cousin's vineyard becomes yours. Imagine explaining that over holiday dinner. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi's laws promoted true economic fairness or simply institutionalized the merchant class's dominance. Were they protecting small traders or codifying the pecking order? After all, a poor man's ox wasn't worth quite as much justice as a noble's. Laws may be equal in text, but reality tends to bargain. The sun creeps higher, warming the back of your neck, if you still had a neck in this nap-trance dream walk. A caravan leader pours water over his head and groans. His camel groans louder. Someone's flute playing off-key. Someone else sings about olives. Badly. But the road endures. Not because it's smooth or easy, but because it connects. You pass a way station, a rest point of sun-baked brick with a crude awning for shade. A few traders squat in the dust, eating bread and dried fish. One of them reads a tablet aloud. It's not a poem or a hymn. It's a breakdown of import duties. 5 shekels for fish, 2 for wool, foreign incense taxed at thrice the local rate. Hammurabi, master of bedtime reading material. You pause beside him, listening to the legalese tumble out like gravel. No one argues. These are the rules, and they keep the peace. At least, most of the time. And you realize something else. These people, younger than empires, poorer than temples, dustier than the Nile wind, they know the law. Maybe not every clause, but the spirit of it, the pattern. It gives them a shared language, a shape to the world. Even when they break it, they do so knowing they're bending something real. That's the quiet magic of Hammurabi's nap. It wasn't just about justice or punishment. It was about building a net strong enough to catch the falling bits of everyday life. A cow sold too cheap, a contract delayed, a broken promise whispered in a dusty alley. You move with the road now, no longer watching from above. You are the trade wind, the memory in the wheels, the sigh of someone realizing they forgot to charge enough for their dates. You float past another caravan, this one headed west, and for a moment you feel time ripple. Different clothes, different accents. A merchant quoting the code to a young apprentice. Remember, if the buyer complains, the seller must answer, or pay double. The boy nods solemnly. He's 7. He's already better at business than you. The path bends, then fades, swallowed by heat waves and the illusion of distance. You leave the traders behind, their wheels turning endlessly, like thoughts in a dreaming king's mind. And somewhere, in the vast quiet where memory meets dust, a page turns. Not on a tablet, not in a scroll, in you. Because the road doesn't end. It just leads you back, to Babylon, to laws, to families, to sleep. The trade road dwindles into golden haze, and you let it go. Let the oxen creak into the distance, let the apricots soften in the sun. You are drifting again, back toward the heart of Babylon, but not quite the same Babylon you left. You settle now into its secret pulse, the thing beneath the markets and the temples and the family quarrels. Knowledge. Quiet, careful, dusty knowledge. Written not in song, but in stone. Or more accurately, in wet clay and very pointy sticks. You're in a scribe's workshop now. It's not much. A small, sunlit room with a roof made of woven reeds and a view of precisely nothing. But inside, the air is thick with words. They hang around like smoke, curling in corners, waiting to be read. Every flat surface is cluttered with wax tablets, scrolls, styluses, and at least one half-eaten fig. Here's your historical fact. Babylon was a major center of learning, and Hammurabi's reign helped standardize legal writing through the use of cuneiform, one of the world's earliest writing systems. It was used for everything from epic poems to contracts to weather reports. It wasn't beautiful, but it was powerful, because it lasted. The scribe, let's call him Duri, sits hunched over a slab of soft clay. His beard is smudged with ink. His fingers move with bored precision, like someone who has copied the same 3 words 100 times today and will copy them 100 more tomorrow. He doesn't look up. He doesn't need to. He's alone, but the words are company enough. Quirky tidbit? Scribes in Mesopotamia trained for years, and part of their curriculum included copying out incredibly sassy proverbs. Things like, "The young man who does not listen is like a clay pot that leaks." That's the ancient equivalent of, "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed." Historians still argue whether Hammurabi himself authored the famous code or if he merely commissioned it. Was he the mind behind the clauses, or just the face carved into the stone? The truth is, in royal courts, authorship is murky. But someone, some Duri-like figure, pressed those symbols into clay with aching fingers and dreams of lunch. You watch him now as he copies a clause about property boundaries. It's deeply boring. Something about a tree falling over a fence and whose goat ate what. But Duri is focused, because every word matters. Every wedge pressed into that clay might become permanent, might be copied, might outlive the city itself. And maybe that's what the long nap really is. A quiet persistence. Not conquest. Not gold. But a phrase pressed carefully into clay, dry enough to last beyond crumbling walls and vanished gardens. You glance around the room. On the shelf lies a clay envelope. Yes, those were real. Tablets wrapped in a second layer of clay, sealed shut, meant for official delivery. You had to break them open to read the message, like a prehistoric email with an irreversible "mark as read" button. A student leans in the doorway, yawning. He scratches his head, then wanders in and picks up a stylus. The 2 men don't speak, but soon the only sounds are clay being pressed and the occasional sigh. This is a different kind of devotion, not to gods, not to kings, but to keeping track. You ease down beside a stack of tablets. They smell like earth and finger oil. Some are cracked. Others are sharp with fresh script. One of them contains a list of fines for various offenses. 1 for false witness, 2 for trespassing, half a shekel for a bad batch of beer. Yes, even ancient Babylonians had to deal with flat ale. You smile, imagining Hammurabi drafting the clauses himself, elbowing his advisors. Should we really find someone for watering down beer? Wait, of course we should. Beyond the workshop, you hear the low rumble of the city's daily noise picking up again. Bells, carts, arguments about fish. But inside this little room, time slows. It always has. The scribe finishes his tablet. He sets it aside with a sigh that sounds older than the walls. The student does the same. They lean back, not triumphant, not weary, just still. Because the work never ends. Not for scribes, not for laws, not for sleepy kings or curious listeners drifting across timelines in search of something oddly calming. You reach out, finger hovering just above a fresh line of cuneiform. You almost feel the indentation. Almost. The line says something about compensation for stolen tools. The language is simple, firm, and older than most mountains. It reminds you that justice is often about boring things, not grand speeches or epic battles, but rules about what to do when your neighbor's ox tramples your melon patch. And somehow, that's comforting. You linger a little longer in the workshop, listening to the scratch of styluses, the soft shift of bodies on reed mats. The student sneezes. Duri doesn't even flinch. Probably allergies. Definitely clay dust. As the light shifts, casting strange shadows across the tablets, you realize this was Hammurabi's true ambition. Not just a code, but a habit. A culture of writing, recording, revising. A system meant to keep spinning even while he slept. Because when kings lie down, it's scribes who stay awake. And now, as you rise again, up and away from ink stains and clay fingerprints, you feel a little wiser, a little heavier with knowledge. Not from textbooks, but from time. You float once more over the rooftops, toward the next resting place in this long legal dream, still not fully awake, still not ready to leave. The clay is cooling, but your journey presses on. You drift over Babylon's rooftops once more, but slower now, as if the dream is thickening. The sun lies low in the sky, casting gold over the ziggurats and mud-brick courtyards, turning the Euphrates into a band of melted bronze. It's the kind of hour when shadows grow long and sleepy thoughts begin to coil like cats in your mind. You follow one such shadow, past the scribes and traders, past priests pouring libations and merchants counting lentils, and you find yourself at the river's edge. A cluster of children splash in the shallows, laughter echoing like soft bells. A woman rinses laundry, beating it against a flat rock with a rhythm older than poetry. But what draws you isn't the people. It's what lies just beyond them, on the opposite bank. A strange, half-forgotten corner of the city, where scrolls are fewer, the tablets are worn, and the rules get hazy. This is where the stories sleep. The unofficial Babylon. The version where laws bend, fade, or simply vanish. Because yes, even Hammurabi's famously strict code had its blind spots. Here's your historical fact. While Hammurabi's code is one of the most comprehensive legal collections we have from the ancient world, it notably omits many types of crimes, like theft from temples or specific cases of corruption within the priesthood. Historians suspect these were either handled separately or intentionally excluded for political reasons. You wander deeper into this in-between place, part alley, part courtyard, part marketplace. Everything here seems borrowed, repurposed. A broken statue serves as a bench. An old chariot wheel props up a rickety stall selling pickled fish. A dog sleeps on a tablet that once settled a land dispute. No one seems to notice. You pass a fortune teller. She's ancient, bent like a reed in a storm, and she's muttering about dreams. You listen. Her voice is barely a whisper, but clear. The king sleeps with eyes open. His laws walk without feet. Beware the lion that forgets its claws. You blink. That's either very profound or extremely vague. Probably both. She cackles, as if she read your thoughts, and goes back to sorting pigeon bones. Quirky fringe tidbit? In some Babylonian traditions, people believed the spirits of the dead could return to give legal advice, particularly when disputes were unresolved. Mediums might be called to consult with the deceased during trials. Yes, ancient ghost lawyers. Move over, Phoenix Wright. Historians still argue whether Babylon's underground networks of unofficial brokering, secret debts, and backdoor dealings flourished because the code couldn't touch them, or because it didn't want to. Was this loophole city a failure of law, or a shadow that made the law stronger by contrast? You stroll through a narrow alley where two men are arguing over a goat. The goat looks unbothered. You pause beside a faded mural, half erased by time but still visible. It depicts a figure who might be Hammurabi, or might be a very fashionable fisherman. He holds a staff in one hand, a scroll in the other, and wears what appears to be an extremely dramatic frown. Below the mural, someone has scrawled, crudely and recently, a message in cuneiform shorthand. You lean closer. It says, "Rules are for when someone's watching." And just like that, the tension of this place crystallizes. You feel it in the cracked walls, in the sideways glances, in the way everything hums with a kind of permission. Here, justice isn't absent. It's optional. Still, even this forgotten corner bows in its own way to the sleeping king. You spot a scrap of tablet stuck in a drainage ditch, barely legible but stubbornly intact. It reads, "Let the measure be just, even in shadow." Somebody thought that line was worth preserving, even here. A cat slinks by. It stops, stares straight at you, and blinks. Twice. You could swear it knows what you're doing. Then it hops onto a rooftop and vanishes, tail flicking like punctuation. The air grows cooler now. Evening creeps in on soft feet, and with it comes the rustle of people retreating indoors. Lamps flicker to life. Fires are kindled. Someone sings a lullaby in a courtyard, soft, off-key, utterly perfect. It mingles with the breeze, with the scent of grilled onions and cumin, and you feel something loosen in your chest. For all its crooked corners, this side of Babylon is alive. Vital. Messy, yes, but human. Maybe even more human than the marble halls and pristine records. And Hammurabi? Well, he knew about this place. Not this specific alley, perhaps. Not this goat debate or ghost whisperer. But he knew that laws could only go so far. That people would always find ways to bend, twist, or outright ignore them. His code wasn't about eliminating chaos. It was about giving it borders. You hover for a moment longer, watching the last few stragglers settle down. Someone lights incense. A boy chases a beetle. An old man laughs so hard he drops his bread. And behind it all, unseen but not unfelt, the law sleeps, still coiled in every corner, not omnipotent, not perfect, but present. You turn, ready to leave this place, to let the dream carry you elsewhere. The mural watches as you go. So does the fortune teller. So does the cat. You pretend not to notice. As you float upward, the shadows blur. The city folds inward. The streets sigh. And somewhere beneath you, the goat finally makes a decision. Probably the right one. You drift gently now, lighter, slower, above the rooftops and incense trails, where Babylon begins to shimmer like memory. The city is no longer just a place. It's become sensation. The warmth of sun-baked clay, the smell of date palms in bloom, the quiet weight of ancient eyes watching through time. And tonight, those eyes rest on you as you approach the final dream chamber, the quietest one, the deepest corner of Hammurabi's long nap. A place few visited, even back then. A place of endings and of the beginnings that come disguised as endings. You pass under a stone arch. Ivy creeps up its sides, threading through faded carvings. You follow a path barely marked until you reach a simple structure nestled in a grove of tamarisk trees. No statues, no scribes, no fanfare. Just a sealed room with a small bench outside. You sit. Here's your final historical fact. Hammurabi ruled for over 40 years, dying around 1750 BCE. After his death, Babylon continued to rise for a while, but his immediate successors never quite matched his blend of ambition and charisma. The empire fragmented within a few generations. Even so, his name endured for millennia. Inside this quiet tomb, or memorial, or metaphorical attic, history's not clear. You sense the stillness of a man at rest, not on a battlefield, not at a council, but at last, simply sleeping. His famous stele, with its 282 carved laws, has long since been moved, eventually ending up in the Louvre, as if even Europe couldn't resist a good bedtime rulebook. But this room? It holds no laws, just silence. Quirky tidbit? Hammurabi's laws were written in Akkadian, the everyday language of his people, not the elite scribal Sumerian. This was revolutionary. Most ancient legal systems were reserved for priests or royalty, but Hammurabi wrote for everyone, even the goat herder, even the onion vendor, even the guy whose neighbor kept borrowing his plow and forgetting to return it. Historians still argue whether Hammurabi was truly just or merely clever. Did he believe in fairness, or did he understand that the appearance of fairness was even more powerful? After all, there's no clause in his code about kings who lie or judges who nap, no rule about who watches the watchers. You sit with that thought. Let it melt slowly into your mind like honey in warm tea. Maybe laws are like lullabies, not because they're gentle, but because they repeat. They create rhythm, predictability, a shape to live inside. And yes, sometimes they creak or fail or fall out of tune. But people remember them. They hum them quietly at night. They teach them to their children. You rest your head against the stone wall of the chamber. It's cool, ancient, full of the hum of buried voices. You listen, and they speak, not in words, but in that calm, deliberate tone of someone explaining how to divide an orchard, or settle a debt, or protect a home. The city breathes around you. The ziggurat still stands. The rivers still whisper. Somewhere, a mother scolds a child. Somewhere, A husband apologizes with fresh bread. Somewhere, two scribes argue over whether it's 5 goats or 6 in clause 137. And Hammurabi? He doesn't rise, doesn't speak, but the echo of his order remains, not as thunder, as breath. A final image forms as your eyelids flutter low, the great stele standing tall beneath a twilight sky, stars just beginning to wink above it, its surface worn but legible, its story intact. Not a monument of power, a lullaby carved in stone. And now, wind down, 300 words. Let the scene fade gently now. Let the stone walls dissolve into soft shadows, the last embers of Hammurabi's dream cooling into the silence of deep night. The breeze slows. The city grows quieter with every breath. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts settle. You've wandered far tonight, through palaces and parchment, through riverbeds and ancient debates. And now, it's time to let all that slip softly into the background. There's no judgment here, no fines for sleepy minds, no punishment for drifting thoughts. Only stillness, only peace. You're wrapped now in the hush of centuries, surrounded by the faint heartbeat of history, not loud, not demanding, but steady and comforting, like the rhythm of a distant drum or a grandfather clock ticking in another room. The laws are quiet now. The stories are tucked in. Even the goat has gone to bed. All that remains is this space, just you, resting beneath stars that shine the same as they did when Babylon was young. So let go. Let your breath grow slower. Let your jaw unclench. Let the weight of rules, the dust of time, the clever arguments and tiny scandals all fade into the soft blanket of night. You've earned this rest. You've walked the long road, listened, learned, laughed a little. Now close your eyes and let the ancient king keep watch a while longer. He's good at that. He's had a lot of practice. Good night.